Hi, I'm Doug Boynton, and you're listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition, highlighting the week's news and stories happening in our area. And Week 3 of 2025 certainly has had its fair share of that. In this week's program, the centuries-old mystery of Roanoke Island might soon be solved. Recent discoveries on Hatteras shed light on just what happened to the English colonists who disappeared. In Richmond, the Virginia House of Delegates began the process for constitutional amendments this week, including the right to access all forms of birth control. And not so good news here at Hampton Roads. Residents reported the lowest quality of life in more than a decade. That's according to a new Old Dominion University study. We'll learn more about that too. It's WHRO's Weekly Edition. Following a centuries-old mystery, recently uncovered artifacts on Hatteras Island support the idea that the English colonists who supposedly disappeared from Roanoke Island chose to live alongside the Croatoan tribe. It's the latest development in the fabled lost colony. WHRO's Lisa Godley reports from the Roanoke River Maritime Museum in Plymouth, North Carolina.
The Lost Colony is a marketing campaign that started in 1937, and it created this myth of a colony that vanished, and none of that is real.
Scott Dawson feels passionately that the Lost Colony was never lost.
The recent finds demonstrate that the colonists are living with the Croatoan. They're not just near them on the island in their own little village. They have completely moved in.
Dawson is the president of the Croatoan Archaeological Society and runs the Lost Colony Museum on Hatteras Island, where the Croatoan native tribe lived in the 16th century.
We have empirical physical evidence coming out of the ground with the best professionals in the world behind it.
More than 100 colonists established camp in what is now Manteo in 1587. The leader of the expedition returned to England on a resupply mission, returning in 1590 to find the Roanoke settlement abandoned, with one word carved in a wooden post.
They say that the colony vanished and they left behind this cryptic message on a tree, Croatoan, and no one knows what it means.
Dawson recently spoke at the Roanoke River Maritime Museum in Plymouth, North Carolina.
The reason they do this is mysteries sell, right? But Croatoan is Hatteras Island. It's clearly labeled on the maps.
The highlight of his talk was the recent discovery of artifacts on Hatteras Island. These artifacts further the idea that the colonists left Roanoke Island to live with the Croatoan tribe.
We're finding hammer scale, which is a byproduct from blacksmithing. When you put an iron rod into the coals and you pull it out and it's red hot, that first couple of hits of the hammer, little pieces fly off, and that's called hammer scale. And we have buckets of it. And this is showing they're living there. It's not just traded in. This is showing a presence of the English working metal and living in the Indian village for decades. We're finding this whole metalworking workshop on the site, and natives didn't do that.
And as Hatteras Island becomes more developed, finding these links now is critical.
The history is already crystal clear about what happened. The archaeology is just a cherry on top. But the fact that we're able to preserve all of this Croatoan material as well, that makes me happy because it's in real danger of being lost.
For WHRO News, I'm Lisa Godley.
Next to Williamsburg, where the city reviewed its progress on a 2018 downtown study looking at what's been accomplished, what's left to do, and what no longer makes sense. WHRO's Nick McNamara reports.
Increased housing density and development in downtown Williamsburg is still on the table after a staff leadership committee reviewed the city's downtown vibrancy study. Mayor Doug Pons lauded the progress since the study was published in 2018.
We can't be afraid of housing in the downtown area to really help with the downtown vibrancy study.
The group highlighted completed projects like new flower planters and outdoor seating downtown. They went through recommendations for the future, like increasing density and changing zoning to allow for townhomes and other apartments, as well as ideas to can, like the installation of downtown gateway features. Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
Turning to the Williamsburg-James City County school system, the board plans to name the division's new permanent superintendent in the spring. WHRO's Nick McNamara reported that story, too.
The school board expects to make the announcement in April and intends to bring community stakeholders into the mix early on. An online survey should go live this week, coupled with in-person community meetings this month that will inform the board on the qualities residents want to see in the next superintendent. First-round interviews with candidates will take place in late March. Second-round interviews are planned April 3rd, with the finalist being named later that month. The process will carry on after Superintendent Olwen Herron's effective retirement date on January 31st. Deputy Superintendent Daniel Keever will serve as acting superintendent starting February 1st. Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
A note of transparency, Williamsburg-James City County Schools is a member of HRETA, which holds the license to the WHRO stations. Virginia data centers are the target of a series of proposals from state lawmakers. WHRO's Catherine Hafner reports why.
Data centers have become a growing concern for state leaders. They house thousands of computer servers that need massive amounts of energy to power and cool. Newport News delegate Shelley Simons said at a press conference that she's had more and more constituents ask about the facility's energy use.
That's really the crux of what we're trying to do with these transparency bills. We just want the information so we know what it is we're doing and how we can plan for the future.
She wants the state to create a public website where people can access data on each center's energy and water usage. Other bills would require energy efficiency at data centers, make it harder to build them in residential areas, and study whether residents are unreasonably subsidizing their electricity costs. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
And with it being a new year, things are getting busy again in Richmond. The 2025 Virginia General Assembly started this week. WHRO's Michelle Hankerson brings an overview of what's happening on the legislative front.
This is Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin's last year leading the state, and his proposed budget amendments have to make it through the democratically led legislature. Speaker of the House Don Scott of Portsmouth says he expects most dealings to be boring.
You know, as they say, the governor proposes and the legislature disposes. So I believe that there are some things that the governor will present. We will weigh them responsibly because I think, he is the governor and he has a role, and then do what we need to do where it matches the values of Virginians.
One priority for the Democratic majority will be making sure Virginia doesn't recreate President-elect Donald Trump's agenda. Scott says since Virginia didn't vote for Trump, he got 46% of the state's vote in November, state lawmakers shouldn't try to copy his presidential agenda.
Virginia didn't vote for him. Virginians voted to continue the track where we protect our reproductive health care, that we promote bodily autonomy, that women should have a say in their own health care, and that Virginia, Richmond politicians shouldn't be involved in their doctor's office or in their bedroom.
Scott says Democrats also want to repeal the ban on same-sex marriage that is in Virginia's constitution and find a way to codify automatic restoration of voting rights for felons into the state constitution. The General Assembly is scheduled to adjourn February 22nd. Michelle Hankerson, WHRO News.
The House of Delegates passed multiple constitutional amendments this week. One of them would automatically restore voting rights to people with previous felony convictions. WHRO's Sienna Morales has background on the amendment proposal.
Virginia requires people with felony convictions to apply on an individual basis to the governor to have their civil liberties restored. The proposed amendment would restore a person's rights automatically after being released from incarceration. Here's House Speaker Don Scott. He had his own voting rights reinstated in 2013.
The Constitution says these are inalienable rights. Inalienable means that you can't take them away, you can't transfer them. And we believe that voting is one of those. And so we want to do a constitutional amendment for restoration of rights for those people who have paid their debt to society and come back.
If the Senate and House of Delegates both approve the amendment, it has to pass next year's General Assembly, then a voter referendum in 2026 to end up in the Constitution. Sienna Morales, WHRO News.
The Right to Contraception Act was also passed. It protects the ability to access all forms of birth control. Last year, the bill passed the legislature, but Governor Glenn Youngkin vetoed it. WHRO's Michelle Hankerson has more about that.
Newport News delegate Sia Price is again sponsoring the House version of the legislation. She's confident the bill will make it to Youngkin's desk for a second time.
And he can use the power of his pen to sign them and protect people's rights to use condoms, Plan B, birth control pills, and IUDs. Or he can use the power of his pen to remind Virginians the extremes to which some will go to control women's bodies.
Virginia Democrats originally introduced the Right to Contraception Act after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Now they say they need legislation to protect against what they see as President-elect Donald Trump's ambivalence or outright attacks toward reproductive rights. Henrico County Senator Ghazala Hashmi is sponsoring the Senate bill. She carried last year's version and described the legislation like this to WHRO.
It doesn't change anything, but it adds protection mainly, and that is protection to ensure that people in Virginia continue to have access to contraception and to information about contraception and retain the right to use contraception.
Price's version of the bill passed the House of Delegates on a party line vote this week. Michelle Hankerson, WHRO News.
Here's a conversation from last year's session with one of the law's sponsors, Henrico County Senator Ghazala Hashmi, and WHRO's Michelle Hankerson.
You introduced the Right to Contraception Act, which passed the Senate and the House of Delegates as of this week. What does that change for Virginians?
Right now, it doesn't change anything, but it adds protection mainly, and that is protection to ensure that people in Virginia continue to have access to contraception and to information about contraception and retain the right to use contraception. So it is a very critical and necessary step given the direction that we've seen some other states moving. So this is a protective measure that ensures that Virginians continue to have access to contraceptive care.
A lot of legislation gets filed months before you guys get to Richmond. What was going through your mind when you filed this? Was there anything like in the last 6 months to a year that really alarmed you?
The alarm bells have been ringing in the ways in which many states have created restrictive barriers around abortion access. And there has been considerable discussion among many state legislatures to also restrict contraceptive care. And I think one of the most challenging points of this discussion is that so often we see a conflation between abortion and birth control. And so when groups are talking about restricting abortion, that language often spills into also discussion around restricting birth control and contraception. And so we knew we had to take action just given the heightened discussion around the country and some of the real threats that we have seen in some states.
Do you think Governor Glenn Youngkin will be supportive?
He has not indicated support, but I think if he is going to be responsive to what the overwhelming majority of Virginians want, he will sign it. Protecting contraceptive access is, I think, an easy decision, and I certainly think the governor should be quite open to listening what our advocate communities have been saying, what the majority of Virginians are asking us to do, and certainly he should sign the bill.
And now I wanted to ask, when you came in as senator in 2020, the General Assembly and the governor's mansion were all held by Democrats. As far as you understand, why didn't Virginia Democrats get something like this passed when the path would have been much easier?
You know, I don't think we recognize the urgency, especially around contraceptive protections, and no precedence has been overturned in the manner that it was by the Supreme Court. And I think we didn't anticipate that any Supreme Court in its right mind would make the kind of disastrous decision that it did with Dobbs. Even in 2020, Virginia moved to basically codify Roe v. Wade in our Constitution. We rolled back a lot of the restrictive abortion laws that were in place, the TRAP laws that had passed under Republican control, and we really made huge progress in 2020, and that is what has protected Virginia now in the face of what we're seeing. Virginia is the last state in the southern region to protect abortion access. We're seeing medical refugees from other southern states coming to Virginia to get the kind of healthcare services that they need as their clinics are closing, as their doctors are leaving, and as they are not being provided with the essential care that every person deserves.
That was Virginia Democratic Senator Ghazala Hashmi talking with WHRO's Michelle Hankerson about the proposed Right to Contraception Act. Governor Glenn Youngkin expressed concerns about illegal drone use across the Commonwealth during his trip to President-elect Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate last week. Brad Kuttner from partner station WVTF caught up with one state senator who has a bill to address the issue.
Hampton area Democratic Senator Mamie Locke has the Newport News Shipyard, Langley Military Base, and other federal and national security-related infrastructure in her district, and she's heard complaints about drones in their airspace.
The bottom line is there is a significant gap between what federal and state authorities can pursue and what is needed for an enhanced deterrent. Virginia can step up to further deter this type of activity.
Locke's bill was advanced to its next step unanimously Monday morning. It's a rare point of agreement between Democrats and the majority in Richmond, Youngkin, and President-elect Donald Trump. Here's Trump alongside Governor Glenn Youngkin at Mar-a-Lago last week.
Glenn was telling me today that in Virginia they have drones all over the place too, and nobody's reporting it. I don't know why they're not.
It was the only mention of Virginia at Trump's gathering with Youngkin and other GOP governors. And while Locke's bill may reinforce local authority to address drone issues, she worries Trump's promise to cut federal workers in Virginia could make government installations in her district less safe.
In their minds, it's let's go in and just cut without even understand what it means to federal facilities.
Youngkin also mentioned the importance of new drone legislation during his State of the Commonwealth address, meaning Locke's bill may be on the way to becoming law later this year. In Richmond, I'm Brad Kuttner.
Still ahead on Weekly Edition, there's something over in Jamestown that folks can't quite figure out, just who is buried in the oldest section of the fort's church. But first, the Virginia Beach City Council voted to approve funds for a controversial wetlands project at Pleasure House Point. WHRO's Catherine Hafner has the facts.
The city plans to convert about 8 acres at Pleasure House Point back to the tidal wetlands they once were. But that involves clearing thousands of existing trees, which many residents strongly oppose. They include Wendy Crutchfield, who spoke before council this week.
This current plan irresponsibly destroys something the city pledged to protect.
City officials say they have to do the project in order to get legal credits for wetlands mitigation. City Manager Patrick Duhaney told council that without them, crucial bond-funded flood projects like the Windsor Woods Pump Station will be put on hold.
There are no known alternative paths outside of what's being presented today. We need these credits to keep our flood protection program on track and to keep our promise to the community.
The wetlands restoration at Pleasure House Point will cost more than $12 million. The city plans to start construction next month and finish by October. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
Evictions in Hampton Roads were down last year, but that's not all good news, as the region's cities are still among those with the highest eviction rates. WHRO's Ryan Murphy breaks down what's behind it all.
Christopher Newport University professor Alex Fella says real estate investors buying up lower rent apartments is one reason evictions remain comparatively high in Hampton Roads.
They'll evict people who aren't paying rents, renovate the building, and reposition, as they say, the asset and charge $1,300 for a one-bedroom apartment, where a year ago it might have been $700 a month.
Low housing supply and investor activity have kept eviction rates in the region's cities among the highest in the nation. Just 50 landlords account for nearly 25% of evictions in Hampton Roads. More than half of those, Fella found, were real estate investment groups. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
This is WHRO's Weekly Edition. Remember, for any stories you've missed, you can visit us on the WHRO smartphone app or all social media platforms.
According to a new survey from Old Dominion University, Hampton Roads residents reported the lowest quality of life in nearly a decade. WHRO's Ryan Murphy reported the story.
The latest Life in Hampton Roads survey tracks a continued downward trend in how people view quality of life in the region. Now, 60% of residents say life is good or excellent in the area. But the dissatisfaction isn't equally distributed. About a quarter of residents in Portsmouth described life there as good or excellent, compared to 85% in neighboring Chesapeake. Here's Jesse Richmond, a political science professor at ODU.
And for Portsmouth currently, the turmoil that the city has experienced over recent years in city government, I think that has taken some toll. The city has also suffered for some time from the increased transportation costs driven by tolls for travel to other cities.
Those who think life isn't good in Hampton Roads told researchers improving infrastructure, increasing social services, and reducing crime are the top ways to make things better. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
The Navy is naming its newest hospital ship. Any guesses? Well, they're naming it after Portsmouth Naval, its oldest hospital. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh says the USNS Portsmouth will be the third ship in its class.
Navy Secretary Carlos Del Toro made the announcement Wednesday at Portsmouth Naval Hospital. The smaller, faster ships will eventually replace the Navy's storied hospital ships, USNS Mercy and USNS Comfort.
Every time we deploy the Mercy and Comfort, it literally takes months of planning, and it's thousands of people who will deploy with it. This will deploy with a smaller contingent of medical professionals that actually will be able to go all around the globe.
Last year, the Navy awarded Alabama-based shipbuilder Austal USA a $867 million contract to build 3 hospital ships. The double-hull design makes them faster and able to dock in more shallow ports. The Navy has not decided where they'll be based. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
Some other upcoming vessels got names this week. Secretary of the Navy Carlos Del Toro announced that one of the new Virginia-class submarines will be the USS Norfolk, the fourth to bear that name. 2 upcoming aircraft carriers will be the USS William J. Clinton and George W. Bush. There's a mystery at historic Jamestown. Who is buried within the oldest section of the fort's historic church? WHRO's Catherine Hafner details the mystery.
Jamestown archaeologists found the skeletal remains of a roughly 40-year-old man while excavating the chancel of the church, built in 1617. He was clearly from an upper class, and they thought it could be Sir George Yardley, a famous colonial governor of Virginia.
It was the lone grave there, and one of the most prominent places you can place a burial.
That's Jamestown rediscovery archaeologist Mary Anna Hartley. Her team carefully recovered this man's ancient DNA. Then, forensic genealogists had to track down a living descendant of Yardley's to compare. Now they can say the man buried in the church is not him. But Michael Lavin with the Jamestown team says they still learned a lot.
The consistent factor in all of this is that archaeology is a powerful tool for understanding and interpreting the past.
The search for a genetic match continues. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. We had help today from WHRO's Lisa Godley, Nick McNamara, Catherine Hafner, Steve Walsh, Ryan Murphy, Sienna Morales, and Michelle Hankerson. Also, WVTF's Brad Kuttner, and thanks as always to Connor Worley, who produced today's show. A reminder, you can always catch full episodes on the Weekly Edition podcast feed, and you can get your news updates at WHRO.org, the WHRO smartphone app, and the WHRO Reports podcast feed. For all of us at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Doug Boynton. Stay safe. Be well.